of risk avoidance and buck passing, and the whole penchant to hide action under vague, convoluted language in general preference to follow rules for his own sake, rather than figuring out to get around constraint and problem solving, which is the bedrock of innovation and creativity. The politics that the nation plays is another cause of the civil service institutional decline. The politics of nepotism under the guise of diversity management, alias federal character, that had in turn eroded the meritocracy and competency-based human resource practices. So the combination of this systemic and cultural element had in turn manifested in the following symptoms of a diseased system. The way I've captured in my research is that whereas Nigeria's transformation challenge requires to be propelled by a jet engine, but we have a bureaucracy. We have a bureaucracy that is propelled by the engine of the B2 car. So there is a huge capacity deficit. The factor of policies of nepotism has created a distorted workforce, so that in the civil service today, there are too many people doing nothing in the technical sense of the word, redundancies, too many that do too little under capacity utilization, and too few that are doing too much. There is extensive reliance on consultants to get the work of government done. Only 29% of development projects ever gets completed, with 45% of ongoing projects rated satisfactory, while 26% eventually get cancelled. That's going by the World Bank 2005 review that is still eminently valid. There is a pervasive culture of unreflective adoption of imported model. Much of which are out of sync with the local reality, and adoption of IMF and World Bank and now Chinese government prescriptions are symptomatic of a system that has a weak culture of action and policy research. So what has been the Nigerian transformation journey scorecard? It is a familiar narrative. Nigeria is never short of vision, development plans, transformation ideas. Indeed, we must admit that some of these, the Nigerian past leaders, have implemented policies and programs that have created varying level of changes that unfortunately get perpetually trapped in their transition phases. In other words, there are evidence that some Nigerian past leaders were far-sighted and exhibited considerable measure of understanding of how to manage change. However, most of these change initiatives are often marred in perpetual transition as they struggle to overcome structural limitations that were partly systemic, institutional, cultural, touching on the strength of human capital in the dynamics of achieving desired national transformation. And some of the factors are the policies, like I've mentioned, the nation plays, leadership sophistication and the human resource capacity deficit, unstable macroeconomic climate, policy and program project discontinuity, poor resource allocation, poor program design, lack of disciplined execution, corruption and rentier culture, and overall the almighty Nigerian factor. So what's the way forward? Nigeria needs to institute a new productivity paradigm in the national economy and in service delivery. And the apt illustration or benchmark that we can look at is how Japan, after the bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, managed to revive its economy by deploying the expertise of the likes of Juran, Deming, to utilize the quality management system to revive its manufacturing and other sector, and utilized the MITI, the Ministry of Industry, and to really make strategic intervention in the economy. So we need a new productivity paradigm. We need to get a handle on cost of governance through a carefully implemented national waste reduction strategy and program. MDAs needs to be engineered that is ministry, department, and agency must be engineered to be performance-oriented, technology-enabled, professional, and democratically accountable while using the full potential of public-private partnership to deepen service delivery. Nigeria needs a new generation of public managers that are committed to the agenda of a new productivity paradigm. Building a new generation of public managers will entail a deep rethinking of the intellectual base of skills for running the business of government, deep-seated reskilling and job evaluation to address the internal job worth that will serve as basis for developing a new pay structure that is linked to productivity. The policy of pay in the public service is more based on an HR regime that compensates, uses appointment in the public service to compensate political cronies. So consequently, we have a situation where we recruit 1,000 mediocres, and pay them peanuts instead for jobs that can be done by, 150 experts who are properly paid. And that's what other countries in the world do, So if you then need consultancy support, it's consultancy support to address specifics that experts have conceptualized. But the situation we have now is a situation where we want to develop national plans. A whole range of experts are brought from the academics, from consultancy, PwC, and all. They will develop high-end development plan and hand it over to, civil servants who really cannot really unbundle and deconstruct some of the assumptions in the plan. So invariably, a lot of the development plan are dead on arrival. And what governments over the years do, and I have the fortune of working with the likes of Abayade, Mabubunje, Malayole in the IBB era, because they know that the civil service don't have the critical competencies to drive. They select the good ones, which I call the few that are doing too much. Join them with consultants, create parallel structures. So over the years, we have created so many parallel structures that are larger than the civil service itself. And that's the root of the cost of governance and a lot of the redundancies that the system suffer. Lastly, in winding up for my initial thinking, we need a deep-seated culture change, attitudinal reorientation. And the way to do it is that the civil service must be, the career civil servants must be forced to, log into some reprofessionalization scheme that will be managed by a lot of gatekeepers, professional associations, and all of that. The professional association will need to enforce code of conduct, administrative ethics. We need to launch culture change, then enforce these public service sacred values, merit, public interest, respect for democratic principles like civil servant and MDAs needs to be on service charter with their clients. And they must be able to, the MD goes to the board and the shareholders at the end of the year to account for what he has done in the year. There must be strong performance accountability. We need to enforce the lives of the, FOI, that's freedom of information. Then we must really determine, there are now mechanisms for determining whether somebody is really fit for public service. Indeed, most of the people you find in the public service are either fit to be politicians or to do commercial work, because a lot of the people, like I've said in the past, are likely, they are looking for how to make money. And when you want to make money, the place is not the public service. So there are mechanisms to do all this check, to do a reorientation. At the end of it, the public service must be performance-oriented, must have an incentive scheme to attract the very best people, into service. And that will be the starting point for having a strong institution that can drive the development process. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm very grateful to you for that very good expose into the background, very well researched into the background and the challenges of the civil service. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you clearly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. All right. I want to thank you for that. And I thank you for the amount of research that you have done and using that as an opening statement. I want to take you back to the purge of 1975, because you have laid that as a little foundation of what you think really started the decline of the civil service at that time. The non-implementation of the Udoji Award of 1974, or the misimplementation thereof. I remember those days very well. Everybody was just buying electronics all over the place. Have you got your Udoji? Have you got your Udoji? Have you got your Udoji? And it really turned Nigeria very largely into an import-oriented economy. One of our leaders says the problem of Nigeria was not money. Then you go into the purge of 1975, which I want you to throw further X-ray into. A lot of Nigerians were thinking that that purge was a heroic thing, and that the leader then, I think it was General Murtala Mohammed, did something extremely heroic, purged the civil service, blah, 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 this and that. But you have given it a slightly different bent. And I'd like you to please try to explain to us what really happened, what was the background to that purge, why was that purge undertaken, and what are the deep effects of that purge on the civil service, and a throwback to the Udoji Awards. I remember the case of Sir Manua very, very well. I remember he was one of my mother's one of my mother's mentors in the civil service. I remember my mother almost weeping profusely at what happened to him, and then his eventual demise. I also remember I can't remember his name now, but he was he ended up as an ambassador. I think he was head of service of the Western State Civil Service.
Okay, Chief Simeon Adebo.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Chief Simeon Adebo.
Chief Samuel Adebo. I remember Chief Samuel Adebo very well. I ended up as an ambassador. He was also one of my mother's mentors in those days. She spoke so highly of him and so on and so forth. But he also seemed to have gotten a bit of a wrong end of the stick. And I remember my mother exclaiming when he died, how very painful and how very pained he was. Anyway, can you just explain to us this issue of the 1975 purge and also the issue of the Udoji Awards? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a basic principle in civil service tradition, and that is that there is a distinction between politics and administration. The root of the 1975 purge was that the military came to power. The military is essentially an extension of the bureaucracy. So General Gowon, Aida, Asiodu, the Godalos, Francisca Emmanuel, and all of that were already friends who are almost like colleagues. Now the military got into power and became political head. And, the otherwise civil servant got into reckoning. Now, but there was this challenge of managing the civil war, which was almost technically being politicized. Chief Awolowo had just been released from power, and a whole lot of people were brought into the cabinet of Gowon to stabilize and to gain legitimacy. Now, the likes of what created the concept of the super permanent secretary was that we then had a situation where the permanent secretaries were very, very powerful because Gowon has been used to them. They play golf at TBS and all of that. Lawn tennis and all of that. So the politician, it created a tension between the people, the Shagaris and those who are in the government, Kano, Antonio Nauro and all. But the greatest problem was that whenever a war is fought, those who are at the center of winning the war, when they return, they usually will become heroes. So the likes of T.Y. Danjuma, the likes of Muritala Mohammed and all. But when they returned and they got back to their commander-in-chief, Yakubu Gowon, it became almost like, before you can see Gowon, you have to go and see the sector government. You have to, technically. So it was almost like the fear of the Superman cabinet secretary was the beginning of wisdom. So on top of it, the General Gowon, indicated that 1976 was no more realistic and all of that. So there was a lot of tension. So when Muritala Obasanjo managed to do the coup and got Gowon out of the way, the first set of people they targeted were the top-level civil servants, because they felt that they insulted them as heroes, and that they overstayed their preeminence. But that was done without recognizing that is a very critical component of the elite, the elite in the political elite in Nigeria. So the message that got to people, the civil servants, it created insecurity, demoralized so many people. So, and in my writings, I said, we now had a situation where civil servants who are brought up under the values of deferred gratification, the lives of Adebo and all they were looking forward to is that when they retire, they'll have a very good pension and, they'll be given national honors. The new generation started to learn faster. And that was, and incidentally, that happened when the Nigerian entered into so much money. So it was that. So eventually, Gowon, General Gowon, although General Gowon tends to deny this, but the truth of the matter was that the revenue was huge. And besides, the top-level civil service resented the Doji reform at the time to move in the performance curve. And in organizational theory, what they say is that when organization would enter into its albatross, always at the height of its success. So it got to a situation where the civil service was no more listening to expert advice regarding it, because in 1971, there was a commission headed by Chief Simeon Adebo. Chief Simeon Adebo had been studying the dynamics in the UK civil service and some of the civil service around the world. And he was supposed to address pay and compensation to, and he said the challenge, the civil service that he saw was not going to be able to carry Nigeria into the future. It needed to be reformed. And a new commission needed to be set up. That was how the Doji reform was set. And the Doji reform came up with everything Nigeria required to begin to move on performance. So that was missed. And that began the whole. So what you then had was a situation where the civil service now got into a whole range of things, up to the point that the civil service was running petrol station, was doing a whole lot of things that are not core to its function. So the thing became very sad because not long after, even while General Obasanjo was still in government in 1977, there was already recession. The revenue were no more coming, and that was when he declared austerity measures. So what there happened was that the pay and compensation level of the civil service has gone so high that the economy can no more support. And by 1967, Gowon had created 12 states out of the 4 regions. The implication of that is that he had created another 13 bureaucracies that needed to be funded. In 1976, the states were increased to 19. So we kept multiplying but the resources were dwindling. So consequently, under the IBB and with the advice of the IMF and the World Bank, it became expedient that Nigeria had to implement structural adjustment program. The structural adjustment program dealt a lot of blow on the civil service. But as we speak to today, especially because of the role that industrial unions, that's the labor union, play in driving away the government is hesitating to do the needful, i.e., to implement, to rationalization of the public service, because a lot of institutions are surviving just paying salaries and hitting into the revenue of government. As we speak, the recurrent budget is close to 70%, and only 30% is available for development purpose. So a lot of them, development projects can no more be funded. So, but because government has never been able to overcome, confronting the union who stand in the interest of the workers, what they do perpetually is to be creating parallel structures to implement their program and neglecting the civil service. The other thing that the Professor Ladu Padamalekun, my PhD supervisor, did was in 2005, and he did a study of 29 African countries and classified them in terms of how they are growing to support development. And he concluded that whereas the likes of Botswana, Namibia, and all, Mauritius, are in the high advanced reformer, while the likes of Ethiopia, South Africa are, committed reformer, Nigeria is hesitant reformer because reform of the civil service is used more for political branding because it's never seen through. So consequently, the performance, what is performance management system? And that was what Tunji introduced. What we are saying is that you need to, that when you look at a civil service as a system, or the development process as a system, there is input, process, output, and outcome. The civil service orientation is to manage input and process. We do not have the capacity to manage output and outcome because we don't set targets. We don't put people on performance contracts. We don't do, what we use is what we call annual performance appraisal system that does not assess anybody. So consequently, all you need to do to survive in the civil service is not to develop capacity or to know what to do or to deliver anything. All you need to do is to be in the good book of people and remain there. And a system that is run that way can really not generate the required dividends that add up to create multiply effect for the economy and create transformation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We're soon going to throw the floor open for a few questions here and there. Yes, but there's also something very, very germane that you said. And it's almost as though we know what to do really. We know what to do really. But there seems to be this hesitation. You've alluded it to be maybe the fear of the various labor unions and so on and so forth. Is there no person, no government that can actually call the labor unions, explain to them what we're going through, and come up with some kind of solution? Because Nigeria cannot continue this way. Number one, 70% of your revenue is paying people who are not producing anything, okay? So it's like you are being hit in 3 different dimensions. A lot of your money is going down the drain that you could have used for other things. and these people are being paid, they are not questioned, they are not producing. If anything at all, they're almost like blockers and gatekeepers and preventers of development. Because if you go to government now with a project that should benefit government, the first thing that you are being asked is, what's in it for me? And if there's nothing in it for him or her, then the project that should necessarily benefit many people. A friend of mine, Yele Aluko, a doctor in the US, wanted to bring medical equipment free of charge into Nigeria many, many years ago. But the people that he met in the civil service structure asked him what was in it for them. So he simply took his containers and went to another country in West Africa. So Nigeria was denied free medical equipment because one or two people somewhere refused to cooperate to benefit about 1,000 people because a few thousand naira was not available for them. So we have this problem all the time. And I dare say, even the 30% that is allowed or allocatable for development, only about 5 to 20% of that 30% actually shows up in any kind of development of any sort. Because I'm sure between 40 and 80% of that 30% either is lost in exaggerated invoices, exaggerated procurement processes, and a bit of graft and corruption. What do we do, Prof? What do we do at this point in time? Because Nigeria simply cannot continue this way.
The issue is that there are a whole range of governance reform that has to happen. A whole lot of people get to power with shaky legitimacy. And they immediately get to power. A lot of them are not the best prepared to govern. For 1 year, they are still trying to transition, to understand their remit, to get their programs together. Then they now realize that, okay, they needed to, the easy one we use in change management, that you need to, before you can eat omelette, you have to break egg. You have to really implement some you have to close your hearts to do some radical reforms. So the first thing is that if the electoral process is not right, to throw the right kind of people to government. And, if you look at the lives of Chief Awolowo, the level of preparation that Awolowo had before he became premier was such that he was already clear in his mind what he wants to do. You don't have that level of thing again. So the problem, the truth of the matter is that 4 years to a politician is a short term. So, and most of the systemic changes that we're talking about are long term. So it's a risk that you have to take. So let me give you an instance of where it's been done well. When Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, she rode on a whole lot of conversation in development discourse, monetarist, as opposed to the Keynesian economics and all of that. She knew she wanted to go the track of privatization, deregulating the economy and all of that. And she knew she needed the civil service. What she did, and that was where Thatcher got the Iron Lady. She knew, first of all, that every worker in the civil service of UK was under some contract. And unless there is amendment to the labor law and some other thing, it will. So she spent the first set of time she had to confront, and that was when she really confronted the mines workers and all of that, until she got the amendment done. And what she then did was that, knowing that she needed the institution to perform, she brought Lord Rayner. Lord Rayner was the MD of Marks and Spencer at the time, and said, listen, you have given UK a brand. come and sit and get me an institution that can deliver the UK. They faced up to it, they readjust the entire mechanism. It made her so unpopular, but she managed to retain a team majority to keep herself until the economy of UK started to, take shape. And she was stabilized and she stayed long. So, but the argument of labor is also something worth looking at. The labor that we have today are more educated than the labor of the old times. They have done the research. And they are saying that, okay, if you want to face up to personnel cost, let's not face personnel cost alone by rationalizing. Let's look at let's unbundle the entire expenditure structure of government. And some have confronted government and saying that the amount spent by either the National Assembly or some collegiate of ministers is enough to pay civil servants. So the question is, let's break down the entire expenditure of government. And sincerely, we have never been able to, lately, efficiency unit was set up in the Ministry of Finance, but the government wanted to start with the implementation of voluntary reform. When they saw that the extensive number of people that might be downsized, they were fearing that they may create an unemployment, and they didn't go that track. And I'll give you another instance, Chief Akande in Osun State. He was very stubborn and said he was going to get the reform done, including the reform, the teachers that are not fit must be purged. He didn't get his reform to, halfway by the time the election came, and he was voted out. So there are some dynamics in this so-called theory of stomach infrastructure that limits the extent to which a government can be forthright in Nigeria. But for me, it's simply because there is a lot to do with the level of leadership sophistication. A lot of our leaders, let's see, I've seen a couple of governors, Governor Baseki, most of the states in Nigeria are not viable, but in spite of it all, he's been able to do a few strides, and then Nasir Rufai and Kaduna. They are doing the incredible stuff. The Ogun State is, moving fast, and, you might be able to do that. So certainly, it's a whole ball game where we feel that the government should do things differently, but unfortunately, that's where we are. And we're happy that the likes of Pastor Godalo is taking interest in development conversation. I'm sure you are also educating a whole range of people that will find themselves in some critical position and will create pockets of effectiveness here and there that might add up to ignite sufficient multiply effects and transformation in the economy.
Thank you very much. And this really is why we are actually having these conversations, because you'll find also that a lot of the people who should know in Nigeria don't actually know. There's a lot of conversation, complaints, grumbling, blah, blah, blah. Why don't they do this? Why they do that? But the little pieces that should be in place for people to do what they need to do are not there. So part of what we're trying to do on this platform is really to educate people, to inform them so that they can take better decisions going forward in the future, especially the so-called elite who stand aloof and away from all these conversations and getting their feet dirty. And if they don't, we're going to have a hard time. You did mention the Onrosaye report. I don't know how much of that report you know and how you have studied it, what the principles of that report was. A friend of mine, Mr. Pam, on this forum was asking for some information on that report. Why didn't he see the light of day? What do we do going forward? And honestly, if you are going to advise government and people in leadership today, as we are, advise President Buhari, what do we do concerning the civil service that can be simple, effective, practicable, and implementable? And what are the pieces we need to put in together to cause this change? It may take us a year, may take us 2 years, may take us 3 or 4, even if you can hazard a time, that we can do it in such a way that most of Nigeria will receive it and it will cause the desired effect. I'll be glad to know that. I don't know if my question is clear or if I need to.
It's very clear. It's very clear. Yes, the Orosai report was yet another attempt to say, okay, how can we begin to bring down this whole cost of governance? And he was then asked to take a look at institutions and to say, okay, there are so many research reports, there are so many official reports saying that a lot of agencies are duplicating themselves. There are some that have outlived their usefulness and needed to be scrapped, and all of that. Then there are some institutions in Nigeria that really can survive on their own. I mean, that if given to really good business savvy people, really can generate their own income and be self-sustaining. So the committee then went to work. I did a piece on it that I delivered at NIPS, which I'll forward to you hereafter. So what it did was then to do a functional analysis of the federal government institutions. And he was able to bring out those that are duplicating, and they are huge in number. Then there are some that he thought could conveniently be merged. There are some that really will lose nothing if you ask them to go. A number of those that are affected are also very influential. And what you find along the line is, should we allow this one to go? Shouldn't this be? And the typical Nigerian conversation. So back and forth. But I think the biggest challenge that the government has in not implementing the Orosai reform is the whole issue of transferring costs from payroll to pension. Because if you lay off people, you have to pay severance cost. And if you do it too massively, the cost may be so huge that the government may not be able to afford it. So technically, there is some crude sense within government, but unfortunately, reform is not backing it up. And what some sense, and those that are advising government, why don't you move? In the first place, the civil service, the public service is an aging service, meaning that a lot of the people that are at work, because over the years we have not been recruiting people, because really, if you cannot cope with the present pace payroll, why do you bring in new people? So consequently, the average age of a civil servant today is about 45. So if with a bulk, in fact, in the directorate level, you discover that as soon as you are appointed director, 2 years you have gone, you have retired. A large number, when they are appointed permanent secretary, they have returned. So it's almost like saying, okay, why don't you allow all of them to retire off, rather than incurring a severe cost that we may have to negotiate with labor and be able to. But you see, this has been a kind of a common sense thinking that has persisted for decades and has not helped, anybody. So my own sense is that there are different ways by which the government really can confront their own, and the best way to do it is to really institute performance management system. That's to say, every ministry is given targets of what to meet, what to do. In Australia, for example, one of the models that is used around the world is that the government resolves and says, okay, now currently the benchmark is 70% recurrent and 30% capital. that we have mapped it that we want to move capital to 50. So what they then do is to say, okay, they generate a guideline and ask every ministry, give them their budget and says, we don't care how you spend your money, but you must not exceed this. So what happened in Australia is that every staff in that ministry has to be justify why he's there. In any case, the permanent secretary and the minister is under performance contract. So what they would do is that they will now do a workforce audit and say, we can't cope with this level of staffing. We need this, we need that, we need to spend more to bring in people. So gradually the system can begin to adjust themselves. So you are laid off largely because really you are not fit. So under that, then you can invoke what we call the public interest. So there are a whole lot of approaches that can do, but the bottom line is that we must have a new model of the service that we're about to build. We must start at some point to create a new generation of public managers. And it must be creating tension for some people in the service that you are not fit into this level of competencies. So that at least as soon as those that are the oldest fade away, or a new generation will emerge. And what you will find, and that was what happened in the UK. In the UK, at a point, they started to advertise the position of permanent secretaries. And in doing that, they throw it open and those inside will apply, those outside will apply. But what they find is that 90% of those who really come tops in those exams are the internal civil servant. But gradually, they started using it to bring in skills from other sectors to infiltrate the economy, the top level of the economy, and to begin to change the DNA of the system. So there are a whole range of things that needs to be done. Is huge, but for the level of this conversation and the answer to your question, that's perhaps what I like to be able to provide now.
Thank you very, very much for that insight. If there are people who want to ask a question, I see my friend Tonye Cole is raising up his hands. He would like to ask a question. So Tonye, I would ask you to ask your question. You can unmute yourself. And after that, Mrs. Adetula, who herself, I think, used to be in the civil service and therefore may be able to give us some insight. So Tonye, and then Mrs. Adetula. Go ahead, Tonye.
Prof, nice to see you again. Pastor, thank you very much. Straight to my question. Prof, we get asked a lot by the generation that is coming behind us, that what is the point of not giving up hope in Nigeria? For those people like you who have been right in the center, why do you keep doing what you are doing? Why have you not given up hope? And why do you still believe that Nigeria can actually turn the corner?
Yeah, the painful things for me, and when we see, I'll share the story. I mean, the person that encouraged me to join the public service, the civil service, was late Professor Tunji Abayade. And I can tell why he asked me to stay. He struggled for almost 4 decades to get economic development program to change the face of Nigeria. And by 1993, when the Abiola thing came, he was thoroughly frustrated. He created the Development Policy Center and left for Ibadan. So when I said, I don't want to enter his kind of frustration, he told me that he gave me some sense of the rise and fall of civilization and the fact that some people must always be ready. But why I keep doing what I am doing, straight to your answer, is because sincerely, in the heart of heart, Nigeria is so easy to fix. And it's very painful. So what I've elected to do is, that's why I've been writing. I've just written my 17th book. You know, you see, I just believe, because when I started this struggle to get the governance and institution issues right, I was reading the likes of Adebayo, you know, mostly academics. So I didn't quite get that. So I thought that I needed to document my experience as an expert insider, so that a new generation of people will be inspired to realize that the job of getting Nigerians to be on the path of sustainable progress is very easy. It's just that the politics that the nation plays, you know, is such that it must be resolved. If it's not resolved, I mean, I'd have to go through a lot of things in the civil service. You find someone brought from some states who has no clue and is brought to be your boss. But because I knew my mission was to understand that system and to retire and become an expert, you know, in the hope that maybe Nigeria will be ready and will still need some of this expertise in order to fix the, you know, to rebuild the institutions. So that's what keeps me on. And I believe that because I've documented a lot of my ideas, if I am able to live long enough, by the time I'll be passing, I'll be happy, because as we speak now, my mentee team, people really understand what I've written, is running to about 3,000. People really connect with me, saying that I should clarify issues and all, and I'm happy. So it's just to say that Nigeria, when we are ready, there are a whole lot of people who really have prepared themselves for different level of the development conversation, who can be brought to the table and whose expertise can be used to take Nigeria forward. So that's what keeps me on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Adetula, can we have your question, please?
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Pastor Itua. Let me first of all start by thanking Professor Olaopa for taking us on this journey. And Pastor Itua, I also thank you for not just giving us a platform to interact and discuss, but you have also indicated to us that you have a listening ear. And I'm going to lead the people who will not be worrying you, because another topic has come up. Now, when I joined the civil service, I remember there was something they called GO, General Order. I'm not sure if it is still in use. Even if it is still being in use, it will be outdated. So Professor Olaopa will tell us if it is, and that was our Bible in the civil service. You are not under any condition allowed as a civil servant to do any type of business. You must concentrate on what you are doing. And you, not only that, you must not do business, you must not be seen to be doing business privately. But what do you find nowadays? All the civil servants are the contractors. I don't listen to them when they ask me to write them proposal. I won't bother to write any proposal, because if you write any proposal for them, they will not acknowledge. They will change all the wordings. 2-3 months later, you see that they are already using your proposal without even getting it. Anyway, that's just by the way. Now, my own concern and what I want us to address is the corruption that is embedded, that is inside the civil service. But unfortunately, the people who should help us are the ones at the houses of the assembly and the Senate and whatever. They will not. I remember very well the African Union Convention on Prevention and Combating Corruption. Nigeria was one of the first to sign it in 2003. Then in 2006, it was ratified, and they deposited it with the AU December 29, 2006. And I recall the active role I played in getting, in getting together the document. That was where I think I first met Ibrahim Pam. He came then from the Federal Ministry of Justice to Addis Ababa. And a member country mentioned that, Mr. Adetula, you are so active. The chairperson said, oh, she's a Nigerian. She's not just a Nigerian, she's a civil servant from Nigeria. And she's using her experience in telling us what to put. And we did put everything there, and it was true. But I'm not even sure if the House, the Senate, or whatever has done anything to that document. So that is exactly what I want us to now address. Why? There's a lady who had passed a comment and I have responded. Afolabi, I think I've forgotten her name. Okay. Pastor Itua, we are still going to discuss actions to mitigate and prevent corruption in the Nigerian civil service, because you need to know what is going on. A certain officer was just removed without any cause over 10 years ago, just because he didn't play the game. He went to court, got a son who did his case pro bono. He won, and he was asked to be paid. Will you all believe the people who are now going to pay said they will remove 4 million naira from his salary of over 12 years. He begged them to remove 2 million. They refused. Up to now, he has not been paid. That is just a tip of the iceberg. I will keep quiet for others to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The whole issue of corruption is very systemic. And we have seen that if a couple of the predisposing institutional factors are eliminated, it's so easy. I can tell you, when I was doing my doctorate on the Federal Civil Service, I audited a few of the institutions, BP, a couple of institutions that are really properly structured in a professional curve. It's almost technically impossible for you to ask for, bribes and all of that. Now, but you see, the challenge of the question to ask is, a highly professional civil servant that wants to live a life of prestige is earning between 13,000 to 80,000 in a month. The question to ask is this where he's sending his children to school? Is this where he's able to buy a car to use? There are a lot of questions. I'm sure in the days that you joined the civil service, you got into the civil service with some wage, salary structure that will keep you conveniently in the middle class. Quickly, you are given car loan. Before you know it, you got a housing loan. The truth of the matter is that all those have disappeared in the civil service today. And why? The simple reason is that in the years of the oil boom, we created expanded institutions that we have not rationalized. So all we are doing is we are paying for redundancies. So, and because that has not been, that's why when I was making my presentation, I asked myself, I said, job evaluation to be able to click. Again, the system of the general order that you mentioned, general order will always be there. It's still there, public service rules, financial regulation and all. But the question is, it also created its own albatross because in the UK today, you will still have HR policy, you still have, what they call standard operating system, which is what you call the general order. But the difference there is that there are also design in the system to hold you accountable for every resource that you hold. The situation in the country today, you have people who handle tenders, award multi-billion contracts, but really really cannot maintain their car and all of that. So that's one angle. Then we have a very corrupted system. I think a lot is changing now. You have a situation where somebody joined the service by buying your post. In order to progress in the service, you need to pay somebody in order to get what you want. I'm not sure in the days that when you are there, when the likes of Alhaji Sule Katagun was chairman Public Service Commission, it is ever thinkable that anybody will go to Service Commission and say, you pay somebody to give you letter of appointment, to join the service. So the truth of the matter is that in order to be able to eliminate corruption, a few things must happen. We must reprofessionalize the service. We must, remove a lot of redundancy and pay people well. Then you can enforce codes and all of that. Somehow, I will give you an instance that tells me that this system can easily be redeemed. When I was Deputy Director and Head of Policy in the Federal Ministry of Education, I was leading a program, Education Sector Analysis, and I picked in every department the very best in education, and I put them into a technical committee that supports my project. I then got a lot of grants and from UNESCO, from different agencies, UNICEF, World Bank, and all. So I trained all of them because of the project that I had. But do you know the experience that I had? There were about 17 people that were working for me, and the first set of people that were trained. Within about 9 months, virtually all my staff have gotten jobs in United Nations, World Bank, Shell, because they have acquired skill. So you ask yourself, why is the civil service not training? Because the civil service recognizes that if it trains its staff and is capable, it will not stay with the compensation that it's getting. So there is a lot of structural issue that needs to be understood. So that is why, for me, all this EFCC-induced stuff is not what will solve corruption. The first thing is to create system with institutional checks and controls. When you are in the civil service, there are controls. You cannot recruit somebody in your days without clearing from Treasury that he can be funded. Then you cannot employ anybody beyond the cost of living index, because you needed to maintain the prestige of people that are coming in. But what do we, like I said before, what we have now is a situation where you are paying people to come in to cut corners to survive. So you are almost like institutionalizing corruption, and the industries themselves have perfected the act. They know a civil servant is very hungry. When I was in the Ministry of Labor, we have labor offices in all the states of the Federation, but we could not fund them. These are offices that are supposed to be inspecting companies and be writing, reports that will form the basis for regulation. But what do you have? The companies, because they need those reports in order to be able to assess some few of their jobs, are the ones that provide transport costs for the labor offices. They are the ones that give them. So invariably what they do is that they write the report and say, okay, who pays the piper, they pay the tune. So, madam, there is a lot of institutional rot that we need to look at. I was in the labor office in Geneva. A lot of our embassies can't even pay rent, yet we keep opening more embassies. Our universities cannot, there is virtually no university in Nigeria that is giving funds for research, yet the federal government is creating more and more universities. You know you cannot fund well, yet you are. So there are a whole lot of institutional issues, and I like that the conversation has started, but there are so many dimensions to this conversation that needs to also be thoroughly interrogated. Incidentally, there are a lot of reports here and there now around government that can shed light for people who really need to understand a couple of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think a lady, Miss Tyre Eitemi, was putting up her hand. She also is a civil service kid. Her mother used to be SSG in Lagos State many, many years ago. Turned 80 yesterday. Happy birthday, Mama. Eitemi, can we hear your question, please, or your comment?
Yes, Pastor Ito. No, I was just wanting to speak to what Prof said. For me, at the very bedrock of these issues, I mean, people have touched upon them, but the very bedrock for me is this thing of what I call a people deficit that we have in the nation as a whole, not just the civil service. The civil service being just a microcosm of what Nigeria actually is. Now, the question I wanted to ask Prof is that has there been any attempt, really, I mean, in recent times, you talked earlier about Udoji and everything. Has there been any attempt at all to review the civil service within the context of what I would call fit for purpose, to see how fit the people are and their competencies are for the jobs at hand, so to speak?
Thank you very much. And my hearty congratulations to Mommy. I knew her as a senior when she was head of service in Lagos State, and I was delighted to see her in the media being celebrated. She knows me very personally. The truth of the matter is that there has always been reform. The question is, how far have some of the reform gone? In terms of being fit for purpose, one of the best reforms that Nigeria embarked on was this Servicom reform. But unfortunately, we really lost it after 2007 because it's not sustained. In terms of being able to tackle some of the cost of governance, there was an attempt to do monetization of fringe benefits. But as with everything in Nigeria, we don't do impact assessment to determine whether some of the measures that we took really were appropriate. The situation, I'm not sure, has really addressed a lot of the concerns, that was. We have also been able to get a lot of reform around pension. Now we are doing contributory pensions and all of that. So there are a whole range of solid reforms that have happened. But the question is, in terms of being able to really rejig the functionality and the systemic efficiency of that, are they sufficient to catalyze the entire system? That's the challenge. And the whole lot of the so-called, some of the reform really have not been backed up by other reforms that will make them to be functional. For example, the Servicom cannot survive without performance management system. The current head of service with the support of AIG, Ike Mokwe, they are trying to get that started all over again. It's strange because that has been the center of reform since 1974. So like my teacher, Ladipo Adamalekun, said, the problem of Nigeria is that we are a hesitant reformer. We start reform with all the hypes. We are never patient to see anything through. And in the heat of election, we forget a lot of this thing in order to win election, and we come back to square one. So the question of being able to, and also what we also see is that the extent to which there is a, what do they call it? They call it the turnover rates of people. I talked of the aging service. I was the first director of programs in the Bureau of Public Service Reform. I returned to give a lecture, only to discover that nobody even understood what we did. All the years that we did, everybody has lost, and they are talking some level of basics. Then I was wondering, so what has happened to everything that I did for 15 years? So the question of institutional memory is also not there. You will find a lot of characters who are just interested in going for conferences in APAM and all of that, but really are not, on top of knowledge enough to be able to do stuff. So, thank you.
Oh my goodness. Interesting. Do we have any other people who want to make a comment or ask a question? 15 years of loss. Mrs. Adetula, you want to say something very quickly? All right, because you're soon going.
Yes, thank you. The last thing I wanted to say, I want to think aloud to see how it can be possible. I was going to suggest, I don't know how possible it is, for there to be a law in Nigeria whereby, as a civil servant, public servant, from day one that you begin the job, from the time you retire, they know how much you would have earned, even just for argument's sake that you did not touch one kobo. But after you have retired and you are found to have 10 houses, schools, bakeries, everything, anything, you should be queried. You have to give an account of how and where, how did you acquire all those things. Even if after your death, you put all those things in your will, in your estate, that law must be possible to go and retrieve all those things that do not belong to you, that belong to the government. Until we do that, because this is what is encouraging the current ones who are still there, they will tell you, oh, Mr. AAA, Mr. BBB has done his own and got away. So why can't I do my own and I will get away? That is where I don't know how it's going to happen, but I think we, as a people, class action, we should try, because I keep saying it, until something is done to the civil service, there'll be no peace in that country. They are the ones, they know all the nooks and hooks and corners of everything, and they will advise the minister. They know a hungry minister as soon as he or she comes, and they will advise that minister, do this, do that. And if you don't do it, you are in trouble. That's another. And those ones too are ready. I'm not saying all of them. You remember late Chief Bola Ige, when he screamed that, what do you want me to do with 13 cars at the same time? Do you want me to attach one to the other when I'm going? Because the officials gave him 13 official vehicles. Thank you very much, Pastor Itua.
Yeah, let me quickly respond to that. Madam, certainly a lot is being done presently. As we speak, the EFCC, the ICPC have software, and now we have BVN and all of that. That that trace a lot of your expenditure and all of that. So there is a lot going in that regard. But the question, the real issue is that it is not difficult to know where a civil servant that has acquired wealth beyond his income, it's not difficult to know where. And it's because of systems vulnerability. Listen, why is it that we construct roads that don't last? It's not difficult. We don't do value for money audit. We don't hold contractor responsible. I was permanent secretary. I met a lot of debt in some of the ministry where I worked. And the contractor would tell me that they couldn't have done better because almost 40% of the contract sum have been taken away from them. Now, if a contractor knows that the project you implement will be audited and you'll be blacklisted, then he knows that he certainly cannot afford to give such bribes to anybody to get a job. The other thing is that there are some changes in the accounting system and in the way we handle our procurement now is a little stronger in terms of conflict of interest. It's now very difficult for a civil servant to be a contractor, like you said, because the procedure now, I know a bit of it. The only thing is that we are very inventive because the system itself is still very vulnerable. Because if you have a system where your minister is telling you that I've just won an election and this is how much I spent and I don't know anywhere to get the money, you have to connive. And so generally we need a new set of characters. So, but there are some changes. I made a contribution to a presentation in NIPS today on things that touch on some of the accounting reform that are happening. They call it some IPSAs, a lot of the, see what IPs alone are safe for government. When I started studying the personnel management system in the Nigerian civil service, it was then I realized that personnel directors, load number of staff on the payroll as basis for receiving budget. And what they then do is that they would then go and open different accounts of ghost workers in order to be able to pull those money out of the system. Now we started and brought in biometrics. A lot of that has been controlled. Pension, ditto, but there are still some dimension that Nigeria being inventive. There's still level of corruption that is happening. For me, the starting point would be rethinking the entire model of bureaucracy that we have. Is no more working. A lot of the internal control are broken down. We need to revive them. We are also implanting technology on so many dead systems. So it's easy for leakages to still be there. So a lot of these have been studied and needs to be done. It needs to be tackled. And if this is done, there are also activity-based costing. The way we draw our programming in budget also opens it also to corruption. Because a lot of the Nigerian projects are never implemented. We never fund MIE. We never fund data. Somebody will claim that they have built a bridge somewhere. This is the only country where somebody, I hear the Redeemed Christian Church of God saying that they constructed a particular road for some million and they discovered that it's being paid out. Yet it's not being paid to them. So a whole lot of that is because people have been able to see the loopholes in the system. But gradually these things are being sorted. But the question is whether it's significant enough to have created sufficiently strong institution that can back up development and minimize some of the distractions. But the starting point must start with really asking ourselves, what kind of public service do we need at this stage in our development? Do we need these massive redundancies? So what can we do? And let me also give you something this time. There was a point that we realized in the CBN that the level of skills of CBN managers could not match the people that they are regulating in the bank. So that is allowing the bank to sidetrack a lot of things. So they needed to inject some new skill when the consolidation was done. So we took the reform to them. And then how do we create the space for new people to come in? So we then said, okay, we created incentive that whoever wants to go will be paid severance pay and all of that. The CBN realized that the very best people in the system were the ones that applied. Because the very best people in the system are those people who are confident that when they are out of the system, they can survive. Those that are not, those who got into the system through system of corruption will do everything to keep themselves in the system. And those are the people that join union and they will fight government to a hilt. But a determined government, I think the likes of Pastor Egudalo, Ike Mokwed, and the whole lot that are now setting up practice to impact the development space should really network and begin to think about how they can change the DNA of people that are going into National Assembly. Can they begin to sponsor people who are really cosmopolitan, real tested professional with skills, with commitment, who can begin to go there? Because a lot of people don't want to go because they only have pension and they don't know how long they will live. They don't want to go and spend money bribing people to get posts. But if the likes of you who are not really politicians, but who really are committed to this system can begin to gradually change the DNA of the system by injecting people, discussing with government on the characters that they will appoint as ministers, looking at the formula of federal character, how can we get in those areas, the very best thrown up to do stuff, and then take more interest. The industry will also, let's take more interest. I always say that we have a public service that does not even know the language of the industry. So the kind of regulation that we do for industry constrict development. And that's why a lot of our farms are relocating, to the, and all of that, likely also because of infrastructural deficit and all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think one of my co-anchors here, Sonny Enebi, has a question. So I'm going to ask him to please unmute his mic and make his question very quickly. And we will begin to round up. Maybe we may have chance for one or two more, and then we really will need to close. Sonny, please, let me hear you.
Thank you very much, Pastor. My question actually is very simple. Prof, I recall that some time ago, a department was created called the Reform Coordination Department in the Federal Civil Service. And you were very involved with that work. What happened, sir, to that work?
Well, the truth was that we conceived the Bureau of Public Service Reform, which was supposed to be responsible for the entire federal-wide reform. But we discovered that we did not have, what you might call the actress, the units in the MDAs. And there was a tension. A lot of the DGs, PAMSED that were appointed were trying to implement direct reform from the center. So we then thought that the best to do is to really reform a department that will be responsible for implementing reform, not just in the ministries, but in the parastatals and in the sector, which we call the Reform Coordination Department. But unfortunately, the challenge the Reform Coordination Department has today is because a lot of the reform programs are not funded. Most of the Reform Coordination Department don't have budgets, and they just find themselves doing some jobs that the minister or the PAMSED just pass on to them for system changes and all of that. So that concept itself is almost like, dying like the previous one. Dr. Philip created what we call the OMR, and that is the Organization, Operation and Management Research Department in each of the ministries that is supposed to be looking at, if you are looking at the utilization of funds that the audit do, the Auditor General do, you should also be looking at the functionality in terms of the efficiency of the management system. You should also be doing management audit. You should also be able to explain what are the gaps in terms of competency and gaps and all. This was what we set up the Reform Coordination Department for. But like statistics unit and division in the ministry that are never funded, when I led the process of bridging the data gap in the Ministry of Education, to print instrument alone, which was funded by USAID, we spent about 700 million to print instrument to do true census around the country. When I left, that department never had up to 2 million budget. So really, so you can see why really you hardly have statistics. That's why you don't have MIE, monitor and evaluation and all of that. I think Nigeria is still stuck in this whole hard side of development management. We want to see how many roads are built, but the metrics and the elements that keep the health of the management system, we are still not sensitive enough to manage them. And that's the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few more questions very quickly and we'll close. There is a David Okoro Dudu who is raising up his hands. I'll ask him to speak. I also saw Mr. Adekunle Olumide on the platform.
Wow.
He's also a bureaucrat of great experience. And he may have one or two comments, having been in different parts of development and some parts of the diplomatic corps, and then finally in the Lagos, I think Business Institute or something. He may have a comment. And then I saw also Jimmy Agbaje somewhere. If he feels up to it, I'll ask him to take a quick comment and we'll close. David, please go ahead.
AUX mode.
David, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Yes.
Otherwise,
can you hear me now?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Pastor Etwa, for your leadership initiative, and thank you, Ms. Olaopa, for your erudite insights into the civil service. I came in late, but the question remains relevant, which is that even if you reform the civil service, you cannot reform the political class. You cannot reform the political class because we have a contraption which was designed by foreigners for foreigners. Our leadership system is never going to produce a knowledge-based, patriotic, selfless, relevant, cosmopolitan public service because they're not there to serve the public. They are the chain successors to a colonial contraption until you form or restructure the Nigerian nation state to make it relevant to the inhabitants. The civil service, the police, the public service, all of that is not going to work because Murtala Mohammed showed to us that you need only one brutal dictator to come and mess things up. I'm sure that you must have addressed that at the very beginning, but I missed that. And I had relatives who were kicked out of the service after 20, 30 years of being diplomats, etc. And we haven't recovered. And so it's not about reforming the civil service or reforming any of the governmental institutions, as relevant as that is. We must sit down and set basis for gathering as one people and having one passport. So the national question must be addressed. If you don't address that, everything else is irrelevant. I thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think that was one of the first points I made. It will be technicist to think that if you reform the bureaucracy, then everything is well. The reform must start with the Constitution. The electoral system must deliver the right people. The votes must count. Then a lot of functions that defines whether government is performing. If you have the first-class, world-class civil service, and the security agencies cannot combat insurgency banditry, no matter what you do, it will not make any difference. So there is a lot of, I agree entirely with you. Then, and the starting point in all of that is really that we need to reform the leadership recruitment system.
Agreed.
We need to find a modality for getting credible technocrat professionals who really are tested to really take interest and being able to function in the political class. So I agree entirely with you, and because the civil service can only go as far. And I also started by saying that if Chief Awolowo did not give the Adebo, the space, if they stood in their way. There was a time when Chief Adebo confessed to me when I started my research. He said there was one of the politicians that misbehaved to his staff, and he went to the premier and said that the entire corps permanent secretary will resign that day if the politician is not called to order. And Chief Awolowo removed the person from the cabinet. Wow. So that's the kind of political leadership, that can form critical partnership, to take And I also gave the example of Thatcher. When Thatcher came into power, the first thing she did was to create an institutional platform that can help her to govern. And that's because our own leadership was responsible and was focused on what to do. So I agree entirely with David, and I think that's my response. I'm waiting to listen to my former boss, and Chiva Dekunle Olumide.
Sorry to put you on the spot, sir. We'd like you to make a comment, Mr. Olumide, please. Please unmute yourself. I saw him, or has he run away? Was on the platform, and as a former boss, it would be nice to hear what you have to tell your former protege. Okay, he's not there. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment? I don't know if my good friend Tunji would like to make a quick comment also.
Well, okay. Thank you very much, Pastor. Prof, thanks for, well, as usual, an elucidating presentation. I think mine is just to highlight the fact that there's a lot of insincerity on all parts. I want to talk about the part where we're saying we're spending 70% of our budget on, recurrent expenditure, which is basically salaries. And 30%, we're budgeting 30%, we're not even spending 30%, because what happens is that salaries are always paid up to 70%, and by the time the year is ended, the budget is never met, so it's less than 30%. Each time there's an increase in salary, we're at it again. The question is, it's time for government now, as in those that govern us, and the governed, the civil servants inclusive in particular, to say, look, what do we really want? You see, what you have now is that the civil servants is, like Prof said, the executive is making money, the National Assembly is making money, we too will make our money. Nobody's providing for us. The executive says nobody's providing for them either. And so what you have is nobody's providing for anybody. And so what you need to do is to say, look, what does the civil servant want? What do Nigerians want? They want good education for their children. They want transportation. They want good transportation. They want housing. That's why Thatcher could do it, because those things were there for the people. Now, if oil price goes up and you have transportation, you have mass transit, it's not going to impact on the average citizen, because the cost of mass transportation will not be impacted by the price of oil going up. If you have good education, ditto the same thing. If you have a health system that is working, then you find that this idea of give me more money, or justifying that what's going to happen, my children cannot go to good schools. We have to be ready to say it's a reset. And I think that's just what I want to say. It's a reset for everybody. Mr. President or Mr. Governor or Mr. Chairman of local government, no more rubbish. This time, we're going to provide those services. Now, Mr. Civil Servant, you can't be increasing salary because there's no money. But we assure you,
you have muted yourself. Can you unmute? Can you unmute?
Oh, sorry. I don't know when you lost me. Anyway, that, that these things are there for you. By the time that is working, then it will be easy. And let's go back again. We go back to the Dubai experience. If you read Al Maktoum, the civil service that he inherited, when he described it, was just like our own our civil service. And he said the goal for him was to create a civil service that would be as efficient as the private sector, which is what he has achieved. So when we go to Dubai and we go to the airports, all those people are public servants. If all those that are working in Dubai, that are of the Emiratis, are civil servants. They're as efficient as the private sector, but they see the benefits, and that's what we must provide. So it's a relationship that we have to agree has to work for everybody. Presently, there's insincerity. Everybody's like, let me grab what I can grab for myself, and then when the ship sinks, we know how many will survive. I think that's just what I wanted to, my own input. Thank you.
Prof. Olaopa, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agbaje. The point you made is very valid, but you see, there is also this whole mentality, and sometimes I wish the oil can dry up and there will be no revenue. And I think the recession is beginning to teach Nigerians to be very creative. Unfortunately, a whole lot of whys the states are not, is the whole conversation around the national question. The issue is that the stream of revenue for government is still very, very, it needs to be expanded. We really need to diversify. Nigeria is very rich. Unfortunately, as we have had, even the oil itself is round tripping. You sell crude oil and you pay more to get refined oil and all of that. So really the country itself is trapped. So the starting point is to create a basis for productivity in the economy. So that, if all the states can, for example, people that are crying for restructuring, what are they saying? Because Olaopa and all could not have done what they did in the regional system if they didn't have, the measure of autonomy that the regions had at the time. If they have to be going to Abuja to get their, it would be another. But I agree entirely with you that the expenditure structure of government needs to be thoroughly re-examined. The government must be able to bite a bit of the bullet and make up its mind what really does the civil service need, what civil service does Nigeria need for this level of development. And there must be a leader that is sufficiently dynamic to say that, okay, a lot of countries have done it. Brazil went the track of privatization. Now, what you are saying, in essence, for education, for all those sectors, Nigeria is the only country in the world where federal government colleges are run by Federal Ministry of Education Department on, basic education. And what did they do? They simply help them to get their budgets, help them to implement some ledger of their contracts and all of that. In other countries, a PPP arrangement involving all the stakeholders will be constituted as a governance structure, and the government will dictate how much is available within its own revenue, and the Parents Teachers Association and all of them will sit together and determine how the schools will be properly run and funded, either from, recovering cost and all of that. Ditto for the university. What we just need to see is to make up our mind. The number of universities that the government is trying to fund only hence get the government to be spreading resources on too many universities, which none that are properly funded. So let the government determine the optimal, the number that it can fund properly, and decide how all others can be merged. And South Africa did it and all. So then we need to also take each ministry to asking, what is the core function of ministry? What are its non-core functions? Can we determine how things that the MDAs don't have competencies to handle, they can be handled through other things like corporatization, through lease consent, contract. There are so many models that can be used. And we are not short of ideas on how a whole lot of the services that government are handling, waste management and all of that, can be properly reprofiled and done. But unfortunately, We keep appointing people through political channels, and the only thing they're looking for is how to recover the cost of election. And yet Nigeria has a huge demographics of tested professionals who can really get things properly done in the government context. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we will close here. And I just want you to take as a closing comment, your closing comment, and my usual question. There's a friend of mine, I won't mention his son name, Mr. David. I was going to get him to make a comment. I don't know if he's ready to make a comment. If he is, he can wave so that I can see him. Would you be ready to make a comment? Very quickly. Okay, make a quick comment, and then I'll get Professor Olaopa to close.
Okay, thank you, Pastor, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you, Prof. I'm not surprised at your delivery. Just to say that all the issues raised and the major thing that is on the line is the systemic nature of the fact that a country gets the civil service it desires. If Prof decides to go into a number of experiences while he was in service, he will be very clear to show and let us know at times when you take the path of what should be done correctly. For whatever reason, the forces against you are so much that all you need to do is to just find a way and just shift if you don't want to compromise. The issues of building structures, where we missed it from is where the civil service after 75 started going into businesses it was not prepared for. They started going into, like you said, selling petrol, doing all things. The civil service is designed as a policy guidance, policy monitoring, regulatory body that does not have any business going into business. But of course, with oil boom, the civil service went into business. And I think those are some of the things that have caused the problem. But again, some of us are unrepentant optimists. Like Prof, we see light down the line. Even if our generation will not benefit from it, we'll lay a foundation where our children will be able to benefit, because the country cannot continue in any sustainable path if you don't have a civil service that can stand its ground and be able to do things correctly the way they should be done. I thank you for this opportunity, Pastor.
Thank you, Andrew.
Very much, sir. And thank you,
Pastor,
for
just to say
that comment. I won't say any further. We've enjoyed that, and I know that you are very, very capable to make that comment, and I won't say much more than that. I think what you have said is a good closing point. The country cannot really continue the way it is. So, Professor Olaopa, you may want to just say a few closing words, but then answer my question that if you were president of Nigeria, how would you govern or lead this country? Next week, we'll be back at 5 o'clock, and we're going to be having a very, very important person. We will be sending the announcements later on down the line so that you'll all try and stay tuned while we continue this conversation. So, Professor Olaopa, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your clarity of thought. Thank you for all the things you've said. I want to thank all our commentators, my brother Tonya Cole, Mrs. Adetula, who actually made this connection possible and suggested and recommended that we talk to Professor Olaopa and said that he will be the best person to help us with the issue of the civil service. I want to thank my good friend, Mr. Agbaje, for his comments. My pastor friend, David Okoro Dudu, all the way from the UK. Thank you very much. And if I've missed anybody out, I just want to thank you also for being here. So, Mr. Olaopa, over to you, your closing comments, and we will close. Thank you very much, Mr. David, for your kind comments and so on and so forth. Maybe one day we'll bring you to the platform also. All right. Okay, thank you so much.
I'm glad
Professor Olaopa,
to
please close for us.
thank you. I'm glad to hear.
I would like you to also help us with your 3,000 mentee group and see how we can further engage and see what to do.
Okay.
Antonio
Okay.
signed up for that group and so on and so forth. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to hear my colleague Andrew David Adejo make comment. The fact that people like him are still in that system gives us a lot of confidence that all our struggles are not lost. If I'm president, very unlikely, but if I do, the first critical thing for me is determination of my first 11. I will be guided by Bob Garrett's idiom that the fish get rotten from the head. The quality of the cabinet, the quality of our advisors invariably determines how far you will go. In spite of all the federal character and the compromises in the appointment, I will put my fingers on where I call the pressure points of the economy. There are about 7 points in the economy through appointment, through budgeting, through reform that you should never compromise. Because if you get it wrong at those points, it will drag the entire dynamics of progress, down. I will certainly also recognize that I can never do anything significant if the states are not delivering values. So I may have to, if the constitutional reform is difficult and political, I may have to do a bit of administrative decentralization and concession for the states to be able to, enter into, raise capital from the stock exchange, both national, to be able to unearth a few of, the mineral resources that they have, and to be able to. It's sad that the bitumen in Ondo State is wasting. It's sad that we could not harvest our gas sufficiently. It's sad that the golds are being mined by hooligans, and now they are constituting menace. I hear that a lot of the banditry that are happening in the country are being done by foreigners who are mining our resources and who are cutting it through the borders, and who have also created parallel armies who are now being called Boko Haram and all of that. So there is a lot of diluted. So I will try to get a handle on all of that by getting the state, because the limiting factor for state to be able to, harness their comparative advantage is legalism, which is twist out from constitution. And a couple of these could be done even ahead of the amendment to the Constitution and all of that, to empower them to be able to do. So there are certainly, no matter what any president does in this country, if you don't diversify the economy, if you don't energize the private sector and get momentum in the industry, really much development cannot happen. And a whole lot of the functions that are getting the public sector overbloated, I will certainly confront them wholeheartedly. I will free the federal government colleges to be managed under different arrangements. The teaching hospitals will be put under different structures of governance. I will free so many things, and these are the stuff that other countries do, and it appears that it looks like they are doing miracle. So if you free them and put them under governance structure that are properly managed, people have been talking, if you privatize an NPC, you lose nothing, because you still collect your tax and you gain revenue. A lot of our roads can be built under some kind of a PPP arrangement that they can pay for themselves. But the problem about it is because we cannot set up structures that are accountable. So consequently, we are fearing that corruption may erode a couple of these. So there are a whole range of innovation that can happen. And if I see a team that of the likes, a collegiate of the two Ogodali of this world having the chance to be president, then I will sit with my colleagues to put this whole thing together into, a program. And I'm sure when they implement it, things will begin to change overnight. I thank you for this opportunity. I commend this initiative. And I will also have some conversation with you on how you might be able to leverage a few platforms like the memes, and where you can begin to talk, take some of the outputs of this effort to policymaker directly, and possibly also create a number of policy dialogues along the way. Thank you, and God bless you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I see that we're building a team, and I'll take you up on your invitation to be part of that team. We must change Nigeria. Nigeria must be reformed. We must put in place a structure to change it, hopefully in our time, and if not, a structure for our children to benefit from. You mentioned bitumen, you mentioned gold, you mentioned the way to restructure. You didn't quite call it that, but find a way to free the economy and diversify this economy. And Nigeria is so blessed, agriculture everywhere, mineral resources, bitumen, gold, gas. We're flaring gas when people are looking for gas everywhere. There's so much that can be done with decisive, incisive, sincere, corruption-free leadership that really has the best interest of Nigeria at heart. And if we free the economy, there will be really no need for anybody to be too greedy, because there will be more than enough. I will join that team. We will work together. We will see how to really, really help Nigeria one way or the other. And by God's grace, God will help us. We're also praying, because I'm a praying man, and I'm sure God will answer our prayers. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, Mr. Adetula. Thank you, my dear friend, Mr. Andrew David Adejo. Thank you for your lovely comments. Thank you for being such a great encouragement. Ibrahim, it's always good to see you. Bambo, thank you very much. Sonia Zolwa, thank you. Olumide Joshe. Let me sign off here and wish you the best. Happy Easter. Have a very, very restful Easter. And let's spend Easter praying to God that God will help us. And see you next week, Thursday, 5 o'clock, by God's grace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Itwa.
Oh,
Happy birthday.
Oh God, happy birthday.
bye. Thank you, Brother Pastor. Bless you. Thank you, Pastor Itwa. God bless you, sir.
Oh, I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Itwa.
Thank you, Pastor. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor. God bless you, sir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. God bless you. Bye.